All right, my next guest is a constitutional free speech attorney and author of the book, The Authoritarians, Their Assault on Individual Liberty, the Constitution, and Free Enterprise from the 19th Century to the Present. Welcome back, Jonathan Emmert. Thank you for joining us.
Yes, sir. Good to be with you.
All right, look, we were talking during the break. I can't think of anything that Biden's doing that isn't first and foremost benefiting the Chinese. But please, sir, explain how the open border is benefiting the Chinese.
Well, recognize that in order to protect America's borders, you must not only have the physical integrity of the border, but you must also have policies in place that prevent other nations from effectively invading this nation and stealing all of our property and our intelligence. And what he's done is not only allowed fentanyl through the southern border, which is clearly a Chinese effort to capitalize on murdering Americans through fentanyl overdose, which they're succeeding in magnificently, but also to do nothing in the face of direct evidence that the Chinese are stealing our intellectual property and are stealing our intelligence. And military intelligence, as well as technological means to enable them to be the most powerful nation on earth and replace the United States. So when you don't do anything in the face of those things, but more, when you actually dismantle America's defenses against the invasion of our borders in this way, you make us totally vulnerable. So it's not only that he's destroying the country physically through the border at the south, but he's also doing it by opening the door to every aspect of American wealth, prosperity, and military defense to the Chinese. And he did that by destroying the China initiative that President Trump had in place. He's doing that by allowing Huawei to buy up all of the auto chip market in the United States. He's allowing the Chinese to also proceed to engage in surveillance of our entire population through TikTok and WeChat. These are just a few of the many, many examples. There is a new espionage case, a counter-espionage case opened by the FBI on average every 12 hours against the Chinese efforts at espionage here. There's some 2,000 open counter-espionage cases, and this is from a weak Justice Department effort by comparison to the threat. And that's the largest number of cases against any state actor in our history. In addition, the Chinese citizens have a legal obligation to the Ministry of State Security in China to engage in espionage in the United States. We have some 2.9 million Chinese citizens in the United States. Compare that to the number of American citizens in China. It's a fraction of that.
And yeah, when you look at how many Chinese students are taking research from the universities and sending it back, how many visiting professors and scientists, I mean, it's mind-blowing. And who would have thought the Chinese would want to buy land next to the Grand Forks the Air Force Base at Grand Forks, North Dakota? I don't understand how that could even be considered. I would turn around if I was the Secretary of State and I'd say, well, now, wait a second. Americans can't go buy land next to your military bases. So, yeah, you can't do that.
So we have an emergency. We are actually being destroyed by our enemy, and they're using the most sophisticated means to do it. Cyber means and also human intelligence. They've weaponized their entire country to take us down. And we have a president who is not defining that as an emergency, who is actually enabling a massive wealth transfer from the United States by destroying the fossil fuel backbone of this country in favor of China-created wind and solar power. He's allowing our nation to be bought, essentially allowing all this farmland to be acquired and even land in Florida. This is a national security nightmare. This is a national security threat that is urgent. And this president is totally complicit with the Chinese. And he's compromised. You got $4.8 million that were poured into Hunter Biden's bank account, which Joe shared for the purpose of paying his own bills, from the CEFC, the Chinese Energy Fund Committee. and that's directly a part of the CCP in China. So we've got a compromised president. He's acting like a compromised president. He's fulfilling the Chinese's greatest wishes. He's not defending this nation, and we have an emergency. We have an intelligence crisis, and the Chinese are greatly benefiting. They are a major threat, and we're treating them as if they're no threat at all.
You know what's amazing is that when Donald Trump called the COVID virus the China virus, well, who was the first to jump out in front and say, well, that's racist. You can't call it the China virus. Now we have Democrats that don't even want to talk about the lab leak theory because, well, they don't want to sound offensive to Asians or something.
Well, they won't even take Eric Swalwell off the Intelligence Committee. And he was not only sleeping, but obviously sharing information with Fang Fang, who is a direct agent of the Chinese security apparatus. How this is possible in the United States. Nancy Pelosi was fully aware, fully briefed by the FBI of the threat that posed. She didn't even remove him from the Intelligence Committee. That is how far the Democrats are into this movement to destroy this country. Now, they may think that they're going to end up in the driver's seat when all of these activities, China pushing as well, results in a destruction of the free market and puts us in a second-class position in the rest of the world and allows China to become the world's superpower. But they're going to be in for a surprise, because if you're going to be a Chinese puppet, you better expect that the Chinese are going to pull the strings. So if Nancy,
and at the same time, Nancy Pelosi is kind of goading on the Chinese. She's like, well, I'm going to go to Taiwan. My friends over at Breitbart were reporting that the Chinese state-run media was saying, well, whatever Joe Biden's talking points on the call were out there are ridiculous. He affirmed the one China policy, said he would not intervene in Taiwan. And now you have Nancy Pelosi saying, I'm going there. And the Chinese are like, well, maybe we'll shoot down your plane.
Right. So the Chinese are effectively looking at Joe Biden and the United States, and they're going, boo, to see whether or not we are moved into that position of cowering. If they can cause us to cower just by their words, then they can effectively take over Taiwan by actual military intervention and expect us to blink. That's what they're doing. They're testing whether or not we will blink. Of course, we should put Nancy Pelosi in Taiwan. We should plant her there with the 82nd Airborne, and she ought to have a presence there just because we need to show our resilience and our willingness not to be intimidated by Xi Jinping. If we don't do that, we will be in a very dire situation for sure, because it's these kinds of actions, when they are not countered, that invite them to be more aggressive. If anything, they're like one of those vice grips where every time you tighten it, it gets tighter and tighter and tighter and tighter. And unless you know the magic trick of unleashing the hinge, you're going to end up with something that is absolutely unbearable in its pressure. That's what the Chinese are doing to this country, and it takes a strong leader, not a complete weakling like Joe Biden, to give us the kind of executive commander-in-chief that we need to face up to these threats.
Well, I think the Chinese know after the pullout of Afghanistan, after 20 years of war, after watching NATO and the West do much of nothing in Ukraine, that, they know that we really don't have the resolve anymore. Not under Biden.